There were 12 windows in Widow Harlow's house, precisely by design. All faced the garden, except one. The 13th window appeared in no records, no blueprints. It didn't exist from the outside, but from within. Every night, a cold draft would seep through it. The frame trembled as if from breath. Sometimes, a voice could be heard behind the glass, a woman's voice. It whispered names. It begged to be opened. When the carpenter tried to seal the window alcove, they found him in the attic dead, his fingers shattered. But the window remained open, and through it, something was watching. If no one ever built that window, who is it that wants it open? And what happens if it stays shut? The Harlow house stood at the edge of the Blackwater Marsh, where the trees grew too close together and the reeds whispered it even when the wind was still. Its silhouette loomed against the misted sky, spiked gables, tall chimneys like hollow throats, and mansard roofs that slipped into blindness. The stone was the color of old teeth, and no ivy ever dared cling to it. Its windows, of which there were supposed to be 12, stared outward like lidded eyes. On cloudy days, which were most, it looked like the house was waiting for something or someone. Inside, the silence was constant. Even when the floors creaked, they did so like an apology. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall was the only rhythm in the place, but it, too, sometimes faltered, skipping seconds or stalling altogether when the air grew especially heavy. No laughter had ever echoed through those rooms, not since the fire, not since the funeral, not since the night the master of the house collapsed in the drawing room, his teacup shattering, and his throat black with something no doctor could explain. The widow, Eleanor Harlow, still wore the same mourning veil. She donned that Dayton black lace that concealed her eyes but not her sharpness. She was tall, almost statuesque, with bone-pale hands and the posture of someone who listened constantly. People in the village said she never slept. They said the candle in her upstairs study never went out, that she was often seen, long after midnight, staring at nothing through a window that didn't exist from the outside. She lived with her niece, a pale girl named Cora, who rarely spoke and never smiled. Cora had the kind of face people didn't remember too quiet, too blank, but her eyes were too dark and too still for her age. She followed Eleanor like a shadow, barefoot in the halls, her nightgown always slightly damp at the hem. The housekeepers tried to bathe her, brush her hair, feed her warm meals, but she recoiled from touch. She didn't cry, she didn't laugh. Sometimes, she just stood in corners, facing the walls. The staff rotated constantly. Maids, cooks, and groundskeepers seldom lasted more than a few weeks. They spoke of strange drafts that would cut through closed hallways, of oil lamps that refused to light near certain doors, and of whispering sounds in rooms where no one stood. One footman swore they saw the dining room chair shift position overnight. Another said the portraits in the upstairs hallway had changed expressions, smiling one day, hollow-eyed the next. Those who left never spoke of why. They simply packed their things, often in silence, and walked out without waiting for their final pay. The new ones always noticed it within the first few days. The smell of mildew that no scrubbing could remove, the cold that radiated from a single point near the east wing, and the silence of the clocks when the air pressure dropped suddenly. Most unnerving of all was the feeling, intangible but certain, that the house was listening, that something unseen moved just a few paces behind you, that if you turned quickly enough, you might catch a glimpse of it, but no one ever did. The villagers avoided the Harlow estate unless summoned. Deliveries were left at the gate. When Eleanor came to town, she moved like a phantom, straight-backed, dry-voiced, never making small talk. Her money was accepted. Her presence endured. Children were told not to speak to her. Some claimed she had been seen speaking to gravestones or kneeling in the marsh at dawn. None of it could be proven, and no one wanted to try. The house itself had once been beautiful, or so said the older townfolk. Built in 1831 with imported woodwork and stained glass, its architect had gone mad before completion. He was found drowned in a rain barrel, his last sketches showing strange angles and window placements that made no mathematical sense. The final blueprints differed from the original drafts. One room, people said, had no door but still had furniture. Another had a window no one could find from the outside. That window had become legend in the village. Children dared each other to sneak onto the grounds and look for it. None ever did. A painter once tried to recreate the house's face from across the field. He gave up after the third day, muttering that the shadows wouldn't stay still, and never painted again. Inside, time felt stretched. The rooms seemed to shift in size depending on the hour. Mirrors tarnished overnight. The cellar door, though always locked, would sometimes creak on its hinges. No one went into the attic, not since the last housemaid fainted upon opening the hatch. She claimed to have heard a woman breathing just behind her ear. Eleanor kept the house running with precision, maintaining routines that had long ceased to serve any purpose. She had tea alone at exactly 4. She lit candles at dusk in rooms no one entered. She cleaned the window panes even when the rain pelted them from outside. And every Sunday, she dressed Cora in her finest and stood her by the west corridor, facing a wall that had once held a mirror. But most unnerving of all was the 13th window. No one remembered building it. No carpenter took credit. It was not on the original plans. From the garden, one counted only 12, but from inside, there it was, a tall, narrow thing on the second floor, set between two doors that led nowhere. It was always cold there, even in summer. The floorboards warped beneath it. The curtains fluttered even when the glass was shut. Eleanor insisted it was nothing, that the stories were nonsense, but no one ever saw her stand near it, not even Cora. What little warmth the house had evaporated near that part of the hallway. Photographs taken there never developed properly. Faces blurred, eyes turned to black smudges. One photograph taken in 1860 showed 13 windows, not 12. But when the photographer returned to count them, he only found 12. He swore he had not edited the image. He left town a week later, shaking. The Harlow house had many doors, but not all of them opened. It had many windows, but not all of them looked out. Some looked in, and one, perhaps, did neither. It simply waited, cold, unmoving, and always just slightly ajar. It began with a new tutor, a reserved man named Whitcomb, who had come from the north on the widow's request. He was a quiet academic, fond of books and silence, which made him a perfect fit at least in theory for the strange hush that ruled the Harlow household. His task was to teach young Cora reading and scripture, though she rarely looked at him, and spoke even less. On his first morning, Whitcomb noticed something he couldn't quite place. The study room on the second floor, where he was instructed to hold their lessons, had an unremarkable layout, shelves of dust-laden books, an oil lamp in each corner, 2 windows facing the northern marshes, or so he thought. But on that particular day, while arranging his papers and waiting for Cora to appear, he noticed a third window. It stood in the corner behind the desk, tall and narrow, its frame sunken slightly into the stone as if it had been carved in a rush. The light that filtered through it was odd grey but with a bluish tint, and it cast elongated shadows on the far wall that trembled even when the air was still. Whitcomb assumed he'd missed it before, distracted by the dimness or by the oppressive hush of the house. But when he looked out through it, he saw not the marsh, not the garden, but a blank stretch of weathered stone, the wall of the east wing, solid, ancient, unmoving. He mentioned the window to Eleanor Harlow in passing, remarking that he hadn't realized there were 3. She did not look up from her correspondence. She simply said, flatly, that there had always been 3, that perhaps he was tired from travel, that the house was large and easy to misremember. Her tone did not invite correction. But Whitcomb couldn't shake the detail. That night, alone in his quarters beneath the attic stairwell, he awoke to a sharp sound of wooden snap, followed by the unmistakable clap of shutters swinging open. He sat her day up, heart pounding, straining his ears, and then he heard it, a voice, thin and wavering like breath on cold glass. It called his name, not loudly, just enough, just outside the window that should not have been there. The next morning, Whitcomb left without breakfast. He did not speak to Eleanor, nor to the cook who waited with his coat. He simply descended the main staircase, pale and shivering, and walked the long gravel path to the village without looking back. No letter of resignation, no complaint, just a silence that felt heavier than any explanation. After he left, things began to change inside the house. Cora, who had never spoken freely, began to murmur under her breath. The maids overheard her near the hearth whispering phrases no one taught her. She says to come. She's waiting. Mama says the door is open now. But Cora's mother had died, giving birth to her. She had never known her, had never even seen a photograph. Eleanor dismissed it as childish nonsense, but her eyes betrayed her tension. She kept Cora close now, forbidding her to go near the east wing alone. And yet, the girl always seemed to drift back to it quiet as breath, drawn as if pulled by a thread. One evening, the cook found her standing barefoot in the hallway near the 13th window. her small hands pressed against the cold glass, whispering, "Don't cry, I'm here now." Her fingers left pale smears behind, like condensation, but the glass was on the inside. Then came the water. It started small and unexplained puddle in the foyer, right beneath the chandelier. No one saw it form. It simply appeared, perfectly round, glistening on the dark wood floor. The servants blamed a leak, though the ceiling above was dry, and the roof had been repaired just a year before. But the puddles kept coming, in the morning, in the dead of night, in rooms with no pipes, no access to water, cold and still and rimmed with fine sediment, like the bottom of a marsh. Soon, the air in the corridor with the 13th window became damp. Books began to curl on the shelves, wallpaper bubbled, candle wicks refused to stay lit, and on 3 separate mornings, the maids found small, wet footprints leading away from the window and disappearing into the floorboards. The prints were narrow, like a child's, but slightly distorted, longer than they should have been. Not bare, not chewed, but something in between. Then came the marks. One morning, when the fog had crept low over the grounds, the butler noticed something strange as he polished the stair banister. A handprint on the inside of the 13th window. Delicate, small, but unmistakable, as though someone had placed their palm against the glass from the other side, except that side faced only stone. He wiped it away, only to find it reappear the next day, accompanied by 2 more. By the end of the week, there were dowsing smears and streaks, like frantic attempts to push through. Some were pressed so hard that faint impressions of fingernails could be seen. One left a trail of blood, thin and dark, across the pane. Eleanor began locking the doors at dusk. She instructed the staff not to speak of the window, to ignore the sounds, and the sounds came more often now, especially after midnight. Scratching, the rustle of skirts, the muffled, wet tap of fingers against glass, sometimes a sharp thump, like something throwing its weight against the wall, and always the voice, whispering, calling. It was not always Cora's name. Sometimes it called Eleanor. Once, it said, "Let me finish it." The youngest maid collapsed during morning chores. She had gone to dust the curtains in the east corridor, and had seen something through the glass. She would not say what, only that it smiled at her, that it had Cora's face, and then she bit through her tongue and was taken away in silence. By the end of the month, 4 staff members had fled. Those who remained refused to enter the east wing at all. Meals were left outside Cora's door. Fires were no longer lit near the 13th window, for they never stayed burning, and the smell of wet earth, of moss, of rot had begun to drift through the halls like a ghost, clinging to clothes and hair and skin. Eleanor sat at her desk longer now, scrawling letters she never sent. Her hands trembled. Her hair, once the color of midnight, had begun to turn gray at the edges. She no longer denied the presence of the window, but she did not speak of it, not even when the ceiling above the main hall began to weep. Then rivulets of dark water traced paths down the walls, forming words in no known language before drying without a trace. The 13th window never opened, but the shutters slammed every night. And somewhere behind the glass, something waited, not with malice, not with hunger, but with longing. They found Cora just after dawn, curled in the center of her bedroom like something dropped from a great height. Her nightgown clung to her skin, soaked through, her hair plastered across her face as if she had been pulled from a river. Around her, the floorboards were drenched, a perfect, silent pool of water spread outward in a wide circle, but no source could be found, no leaks, no overturned jug, no broken window. The air in the room stank of deep earth, of mildew and something odor, saltier, like the inside of a forgotten crypt. Her lips were blue, her eyes fluttered, but she did not wake. When Eleanor touched her skin, it was neither cold nor warm, but something in between, numb, still, unnerving. The doctor, summoned from the village, examined the girl and said she had suffered a fainting spell. He offered tonics. He did not ask why the soles of her feet were black with silt, or why her fingernails were packed with damp grit. He did not want to know. No one did. Eleanor gave the order that afternoon. The bedroom was to be sealed. No argument. The servants moved quickly, grateful for the clarity of instruction. Even if it carried the weight of dread, they covered the 13th window in thick timber boards, hammering them into the stone with iron nails dipped in blast water. The glass itself was painted over layer upon layer of black, until not a trace of light could pass through. Salt was scattered beneath the sill. A crucifix was hung on every wall. Still, no one volunteered to sleep in the room after. That night, the household fell into an uneasy quiet. The wind passed light breath through the rafters. The lanterns burned lower than usual, flickering despite the lack of grease. The shutters of the east wing remained shutting down, nailed where necessary. Yet Eleanor slept with one eye open, her spine tight with tension, listening for the sound she now feared more than any other, the noise of water. At precisely 3 in the morning, it began. The butler was the first to rise, drawn from sleep by a strange rhythm of splashes, like bare feet pacing through a shallow puddle. When he opened his door, the corridor outside was dry, but he could smell it, that same marsh scent, heavy and raw. He turned toward the sealed room and stopped. At the base of the door, a trickle of water was creeping outward across the wooden floor. It moved in straight lines, as if it had been drawn with a ruler. As he stepped closer, he saw something else. A single handprint pressed into the black paint of the boarded window from the inside, still wet, still dripping. The butler did not report it. He packed and left before sunrise. By morning, the window boards had begun to warp. The black paint bubbled, as if something beneath it was breathing. No one dared touch it. No one opened the room. But Eleanor had already seen what she needed to see. The house was not responding to reason. It was responding to presence. Cora had not spoken since the incident. She ate little, slept rarely, but sometimes she would sit upright in bed, her eyes still glazed, and murmur strings of syllables no one recognized. The cook, who had once studied at a seminary in her youth, said the language was old, older than English. Some of it, she claimed, resembled Latin, but there were words that didn't fit, vowels twisted backward, consonants doubled in unnatural ways, as though the mouth that had first spoken them was not shaped like a human's. On the third morning, Eleanor noticed the writing. It was scrawled beneath the window, framed in, jagged, traced in something dark that looked like ash mixed with oil. Ego entis mana. I remain within. She did not know whether it was a warning or a promise. The priest arrived that evening, a tall man with a lean face and eyes too old for his years. Eleanor greeted him with both relief and restraint. He said little as he entered the house, only asked to see the room. She led him upstairs, past the servants who had begun to light candles in every corner. The priest stood before the sealed door in silence for a long time. Then, without touching it, he turned and left the wing. He remained in the house for less than an hour. On his way out, he said only this: "What's inside that room is older than your house, older than your faith, and it knows you now." Then he mounted his horse and disappeared into the fog. He never responded to Eleanor's letters after that. That night, the east wing grew cold, not the chill of an open window or a failing fire, but a dense, press cold, like something vast and breathless had taken root in the walls. The air felt thick, as if heavy water had filled every space between floor and ceiling. The candles died one by one, no draft, just extinguished, as though swallowed. At midnight, the great hearth in the main hall burst into flame. No one had lit it. There were no logs, no embers, just sudden, roaring fire, rising higher than it should have, licking the mantel and curling black soot onto the ceiling. The servants rushed to douse it, throwing linens in water and salt. When it finally faded, burned down to a smear of glowing ash, they saw it. A handprint pressed into the center of the hearthstone. Too large to be Cora's, too long to be Eleanor's. It was skeletal, but not dead-shaped like a hand that had never held anything, only reached. There was no soot where it had touched. The stone beneath was pale, newly exposed, as if the heat had peeled back the years like skin. From that night on, the room did not sleep. Though it was sealed, the house still heard it, the faint creak of boards shifting under invisible weight, the whisper of feet treading across wet stone, the knock of nails against glass that no longer showed the sky. At first, the sounds came only at night, then during the day, then always. Sometimes, Eleanor would find the crucifixes turned backward, the salt lines smeared. Once, she found the hinges of the room's door bent outward, as if pressure had built. Inside steady, relentless, she tried to deny it, to return the house to order, but nothing worked. The walls wet, the windows fogged, the air stayed heavy. And always, just beneath the floorboards of that room, water moved. Not quickly, not angrily, just moved. The blueprint was clear. The 13th window did not exist. Drawn in firm, century-old lines, the original plans of Harlow House showed 12 windows, each carefully placed, labeled, measured. The architect ran his finger along the vellum. his brow furrowed, lips tightening with each pass. He had double-checked, then triple-checked. There was no margin for error. The east-facing wall, the one that overlooked the mist-choked marshes, held only to windows flanked symmetrically on either side of the upper landing. And yet, when he arrived at the house, plans tucked under his arm, he stood before three. The third window rose like a wound in the sternal, narrow, and unlike the others. It was a stained glass window, but no ordinary one. The other windows were plain, their panes warped with age and splotched by time. This one was intact, untouched, a pane of vivid, unnatural clarity. The glass seemed to shift even when still, and it bore a strange image, a woman in mourning black, veiled, standing at the foot of an open grave. Her face, obscured, suggested a grief not frowned in time but still unfolding, as though, at any moment, her head might rise and look directly at the viewer. The architect stared, not just at the image, but at the frame itself. It was embedded deep into the masonry, fused so seamlessly that it must have been installed when the house was built, and yet it held the drawings in his hand, drafted, signed, and certified, dated 1831, 12 windows, no more. Eleanor Harlow offered no explanations. She only nodded, slowly, and said it had always been there, but the way her hand trembled round the lantern she carried told a different story. No one, she admitted later, could recall installing it. She had hired workmen over the years, masons, glaziers, carpenters, but none had touched that part of the house. When she asked them, they looked at her with confusion or alarm. One even refused to return her calls, leaving town altogether within the month. And the window was changing. At first, it had only shown the woman. Then, as nights passed, the background deepened. Trees appeared behind the grave, dark and unfamiliar. The ground beneath her feet grew wet, murky. Then came the fog. It began to swirl inside the glass as though stirred by breath. And soon, the woman herself began to shift. Her veil lifted. Her skin grew paler, stouter, more corpse than widow. And where her eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin, as if they had never formed. The worst was her throat, a single scar, slashed from one side of the neck to the other, deep and jagged, as though something had clawed its way out rather than in. By the seventh night, Eleanor noticed something else. The image was not always still. She caught it first in a flicker, barely a moment, but it was enough. The woman's head had turned, just a fraction, not facing outward, but no longer bowed in mourning. Her attention, it seemed, had shifted to the door. And that night, the door rattled. The entire house had already begun to decay in strange ways. Wood bowed in dry rooms, wallpaper peeled from inside sealed drawers, crucifixes on the walls rusted in hours. But now, the very bones of the structure seemed to groan with effort. Eleanor began sleeping in a chair at the top of the landing, just feet from the stained glass. She kept a lantern lit beside her, a ring of salt at her feet, and a ring of keys in her, lock keys that no longer matched any lock in the house but that she dared not throw away. Each night, she listened. The wind outside had changed. It no longer whispered through trees, but scraped along stone like fingernails. She swore it came from the direction of the marsh, rising with the tide, louder as the clock passed 3. She never looked directly into the window after dark. Others did. A maid, young and curious, lingered too long one evening while dusting the banister. She peered into the stained glass and claimed she saw something move inside it behind the woman. In the trees, a figure, distant, almost skeletal, crawling on all fours. That night she screamed herself awake, claiming it had followed her to her dreams. She left the next morning and was not seen again. The gardener, a man who'd worked for the Harlows for over a decade, refused to trim the ivy that had begun to grow around the window's frame. He insisted it wasn't normal ivy, that it didn't grow from the earth, but from the stone itself. It twisted outward, against gravity, curling back toward the glass like fingers groping for a grip. When Eleanor finally pried one strand loose, she found it was hollow inside and smelled of rot. The window, somehow, had begun to breathe. More than once, someone tried to cover it, first with cloth, then with boards. Each time, the covering was gone by morning, not burned, not cut away, just gone, as though it had never been there at all. The boards left no holes where nails had been. The cloth left no trace of dust. Only the window remained, clearer than ever. And in its reflection, more than the house could be seen. The mirror sheen, at night when viewed just so, showed impossible angles, doors that didn't exist, stairs that spiraled down instead of up. Once, Eleanor thought she saw herself, sitting in her chair, lantern in lap, but behind her reflection stood another figure, tall, veiled, faceless. She dared not turn around. The true horror settled in slowly. The understanding that the window was not meant to be looked through, it was meant to look back. Eleanor began to hear whispers through the glass. They came not through her ears, but through her bones, a tension that built in her teeth, in the cartilage behind her knees, in the pressure of her throat. Words she didn't know but somehow understood, promises, warnings, please. The voice was always female, always hoarse, always familiar. She asked herself, in her darkest moments, if the window had always been there just waiting for someone to see it. One morning, after a particularly long, sleepless stretch, Eleanor found something new. On the floor beneath the stained glass lay a single glove, black silk, delicate, lined with lace. It was damp, mud clung to the cuff, and inside, curled neatly, was a note written in a hand she did not recognize. When it opens, step aside. She did not sleep for 3 days after that. She merely watched the window, hour by hour, waiting for the moment it might twitch, for the latch to shift, for the glass to crack, but it never died, at least not in front of her. Still, every morning, the latch was just a little looser, the ivy climbed a little higher, the woman's mouth in the glass widened, millimeter by millimeter, as if preparing to speak. And each night, when the wind rose and the salt circle crumbled beneath her chair, Eleanor gripped her lantern tighter and listened for footsteps not yet walking. Because she knew whatever had made that window had not come to be seen. It had come to be invited. She had sent them all away. The house grew quiet after that, too quiet, the kind of silence that made the floorboards seem louder, that made the ticking of a clock sound like hammer strikes. The servants had packed their bags one by one, after whispers became too loud to ignore. After doors refused to station and crosses no longer protected anything, even the cook, who had served 3 generations of Harlows, what as she fled, leaving the kitchen cold and unused. The girl had gone first. Eleanor had insisted on it. A carriage before dawn, a long ride to a boarding school that didn't ask questions and offered firm walls and thicker prayers. The child had not protested. She had stopped speaking altogether by then, only stared at her aunt with wide, 2 dark eyes and a mouth that opened, now and then, in perfect silence as though mouthing something she had heard but could not repeat. Now Eleanor was alone in Harlow House. The house did not like that, or perhaps it liked it too much. She began to write. Each night, she took a journal and placed it on the small table by her chair beside the landing, facing the stained glass window. Her entries were simple at first: observations, times, temperatures, whether the fire howled or went out, when the candle guttered, how many creaks came from the 3rd stair. But soon her writing changed. The entries grew longer, less structured, the ink darker, the pressure deeper, lines carved rather than written. She noted the moment the house breathed, which it did at exactly 3:13 every morning. That's when the window began to shudder. At first it was a faint hum, like a fork against china. Then the frame would rattle. A soft knocking came next, so light it could be mistaken for a branch in the wind, except there were no trees near that part of the house. Then the whispering would begin. Always the same voice. It was not mournful. It was not angry. It was not even cold. It was disappointed. You promised, it whispered. Eleanor didn't remember ever making a promise. Don't close me out, it would plead. The voice wasn't quite female, but not male either. It had no origin in the throat. It came from beneath the floorboards, from behind the walls, from inside the bones of the house itself. And more than anything, Eleanor knew it did not belong to the dead. She began to dream of burial. Not her own, but someone else's. She woke each morning with the smell of soil under her nails, the taste of iron in her throat. Once she found damp moss on the hem of her nightgown. Another time, a shard of stone beneath her pillow, etched faintly with a rune she did not know. She stopped sleeping in bed altogether. The chair became her prison, her pulpit, her only refuge. The lamp beside her burned low, but she dared not let it die. The voice was growing stronger. It began to say her name. Not Eleanor. That was too clean, too modern. It used her birth name, the one she had buried with her past, Eleonora, the way her mother had said it. Once, in the cold winters of youth, the voice made it feel dirty now. stretched and spoiled in its tone. It would drag the vowels long, hissing them against the inside of the glass until the panes trembled. Then came the night the shutters failed. She had always braced them, tied them shut with iron hooks and driven nails deep into the sill, but she was tired that night. Her hands shook too much. She missed one latch, just one. At 3:13, the knocking came. At 3:16, the whispering began. At 3:17, the shutter hit the floor. Eleanor did not scream. She could not. Her throat was too dry, too constricted. The air had changed. It was thick, humid, and reeked of decay, but the glass remained intact. Only know it was open. The lower pane had tilted inward, not broken, but inviting. No wind, no sound. Nothing. For a long moment. Then came a single drop of water, falling from nowhere, landing with a heavy splash on the hardwood below. She stared at it, heart hammering. The drop spread slowly, soaking the wood, staining it dark. Another drop followed, and another. But nothing dripped from the ceiling. Eleanor stepped forward. The air was ice against her skin. Her lantern flickered. She saw her reflection, and the window's surface, but something was wrong. Her eyes were closed. The room behind her was still. And yet something in the reflection moved. She turned sharply. Nothing. But when she looked down, there was a footprint, there, left foot, imprinted in the dust just beyond the water's edge. It was narrow, feminine, but something was off. The toes were wrong. The pinky toe was too long, crooked. It reached outward, bent like a hooked finger, and it twitched. Eleanor fell back into her chair, the breath gone from her lungs. The window began to close on its own. Slow, deliberate, and as it did, the voice returned. Closer now, inside her head, not spoken, not whispered, but pulsed like a pressure behind the eyes. I was left. I waited. I emoed. The house moaned. The stones of the wall sweated with moisture. Beneath the floor, something shifted. Not a mouse, not pipes, something larger, something that had been there the whole time, listening, growing. Her journal entry that night was nearly illegible. The ink had bled from the page, as if the words themselves were too saturated with what she'd seen. Only one line stood out clearly, scrawled at a diagonal across the margin. This is not the voice of the dead. It is the voice of what was never allowed to die. She did not sleep again for 3 nights. The 4th night, her lamp went out. She lit another. It died. The next, she tried 3 at once. They hissed and flickered, then died within minutes of the voice's return. She sat in the dark, back pressed to the wall, waiting, but the voice did not speak. It breathed, a slow, wet sound, like lungs full of soil. She thought she saw a handprint on the inside of the window, but when she raised her own hand to match it, her fingers went cold. Something was on the other side. Not trapped, not begging. Waiting. She stopped writing for a while. But when she resumed, the entries changed again. They were no longer in English. The script shifted, curved, tight, looping like thorns. Some resembled Latin, others more ancient glyphs. She didn't remember writing them, but the words bled through multiple pages, as if trying to reach the back cover. The voice grew more confident. It no longer waited for night. She began to hear it in the middle of the day, through mirrors, behind her when she turned a corner, in the chime of bells that no longer hung anywhere in the house. Once, while rinsing her face in the basin, she looked up and saw not her reflection but the woman in the window, standing behind her, no eyes, scar grinning, head tilted as if in sympathy. She stopped using mirrors after that. She boarded the window again, sealed it with bricks, blessed them, anointed them with salt and blood. The house groaned in protest. That night, the kitchen knives were found driven into the wood of the cellar door. And still the voice returned. You closed me, it hissed, but I remember your voice. I remember what you promised. Eleanor no longer remembered anything, but the house did. And the house had a long memory. The house was condemned, officially, paperwork filed, notices nailed to the warped front door, fences erected that no one dared to climb. But it still stood, skeletal and silent, slouched in the overgrown bones of its garden, like a corpse waiting for decay to finish its slow work. No fire ever touched it, no storm had broken it. Time passed, but the 13th window stayed. It had been boarded up, then bricked, then sealed with plaster and scripture, but somehow, impossibly, it returned, Not the stained glass that once glimmered like a trap screen, but plain glass now, gray and simple, fogged at the corners, as if the pane breathed lightly from within. There was no reflection in it, not even of the moon or the dead trees around, just a dim, unmoving room beyond, and the occasional shape. They said she vanished on a Thursday. Eleanor Harlow, the widow, her last journal entry, ended in a jagged stroke of ink across the page, written on the floor beside her chair. The line read, "She won't let me die." The tea beside it was still warm when the constable arrived. Her coat remained on the peg. Her boots stood beneath it. No sign of struggle, no sign of departure. It was as if she had stood up and walked into the wall and dissolved. After that, the house had no occupants, only visitors. Most came at night, teenagers, mostly, from the town, laughing too loudly, whispering dares, making bets, but few got past the iron fence, and those who didn't stay long. They all said the same thing. The window was glowing. It was never a strong light, nothing bright, just a soft, pulsing silver, like moonlight behind thick clouds, but it came from the wrong angle, and flickered, like breath behind glass. Sometimes, they said, there was a figure too pale to be alive, standing behind the pane, watching, or waiting. One boy said he saw a hand pressed to the inside, fingers long and spread too wide. He never spoke again. His parents moved him out of town. But the worst was the face. It wasn't always there, but when it appeared, it hovered just behind the glass, features worked by the aged pane. No eyes, the sockets were dark and slick, as if weeping something thicker than tears. A scar ran from the bottom of the nose to the hollow of the throat, as though the mouth had been sewn shut and then split open again. Its head was always tilted, curious, listening, as though waiting to hear its name. The superstitions began slowly. At first, just whispers. No one walked past the house on Fridays. No one rang the bell after sunset. Then the shopkeeper across the street heard the bells. It was always at 3:13 a.m. His little brass chimes on the door, silent all day, would suddenly jingle as if someone had entered. The first time he went to check, the street was empty. No wind, no footprints. He assumed it was a trick of the air, but it happened again the next Friday, and again, every Friday, at exactly the same time. After the third week, he stopped opening his store on Fridays. Something changed in the town. People spoke more softly, closed their curtains earlier. There was a heaviness in the evenings, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, but it never rained. The animals were the first to react. Dogs stopped walking near the Harlow fence. Birds stopped nesting in its trees. One stray cat was found staring up at the window, unmoving, mouth open, eyes glazed. Its body was stiff with cold, but its paws were wet. People stopped asking what happened to Eleanor. Instead, they started asking another question: who lives in the glass now? The answer came in stories, hushed tales over drinks, accounts from people who didn't want to be believed. One said he saw the window open, just a crack, the glass tilting inward on a hinge that no longer existed. He said he heard breathing. Another, a former mailman, said he saw two figures inside the room. One was Eleanor, the other was Harolder, bloated and stitched like a doll. They mirrored each other's movements, until one raised its hand to wave and the other bled from the eyes. But these were stories, and stories change. What didn't change was the window. It never shattered, despite the years, despite weather, despite time. And sometimes, when someone dared look long enough, they said the face didn't stay inside. It leaned forward, pressed itself to the glass, and smiled, not with lips, not with teeth, but with the entire skull, as though delighted at being seen again. There were rumors that the house could be destroyed. All it would take was fire, or salt, or blessing, but none tried, because the window, was watching, choosing. It had waited years for Eleanor. It had taken her, and it had not closed. The real terror was not the face behind the glass. It was the possibility that the window wasn't a window at all but a door. And a door, once opened, does not forget how to swing wide. The local priest refused to go near it. The town historian burned her notes. The library's blueprints of the house all had the same flaw: 12 windows. The 13th never existed, officially, yet the town's children drew pictures of it without prompting. Same shape, same scar, same hollow eyes. They were always smiling when they drew it. Now, when the wind comes down from the hills, it makes the chimes sing faintly, just enough to make you wonder if someone's there. People walk faster, lights are dim, the town settles into silence. Because the question is no longer who lives behind the glass. It's who will. And some nights just before sleep, just when the veil is thinnest, you might hear it. A whisper from behind the pane of your own window, calling your name.